Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday? Bella in Texas, Shandor in the Bronx, Lorraine in Texas, Bella in Florida, Sharon in New Jersey, Lorraine in Texas, Franco in Trieste, Italy, and Chaim in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Our daf today is page 77 here in Tractate Zevachim, the 29th volume of the Talmud. Working our way through chapter 8, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 2, which with God's help we're going to finish today. We only got a little bit into page 76b yesterday, but it's a short page, so we picked this up near the top of 76b, and we've been talking about this very interesting issue in the case that a peace offering, which is an offering of lesser sanctity, became an animal that was designated to be a peace offering, became intermingled with an animal that was designated to be a guilt offering, which is one of the offerings of the most sacred, right? The highest sanctity. And so the solution that was offered, I think, by Rabbi Shimon was that, okay, so in other words, one person and the owners, one is trying to bring a peace offering, one is trying to bring this guilt offering. The guilt offering would be an obligatory offering in certain situations. The peace offering would be a voluntary offering in most situations. So in this situation, Rabbi Shimon is saying, okay, well, bring both offerings according to the requirements and procedures of the guilt offering, which needs to be slaughtered in the north, and parts of it are eaten by the priests who have to eat it in the courtyard. Whereas the peace offering could be slaughtered in any part of the courtyard. It's eaten by its owners or any Jew who is not tameh, but that includes the priest. So if you do it according to the requirements of the guilt offering, then both owners will have had their offerings accepted. The one who was trying to bring a guilt offering will achieve an atonement through it. And the one that was trying to bring a peace offering, if he was fulfilling a vow that he had made to bring that peace offering, he would have fulfilled it. But the problem is that when you treat a peace offering like a guilt offering, which Rabbi Shimon is right? The manner of bringing a guilt offering will satisfy the requirements of a peace offering, but a peace offering, you have a longer deadline to eat the edible parts of it. You have the day that the offering is brought, the following night, and the whole next day. Whereas the guilt offering, the parts that are going to be eaten have to be eaten that day or that night. And so it would fall out that a peace offering which was still around the next day and had not yet been eaten, it's still fine. It still has its sanctity intact and is available for eating. But because you're not going to apply a law, right, this procedure of Rabbi Shimon, let's say a ruling, that is going to make it expire earlier because you've said, no, it has to be now brought according to the requirements of a guilt offering, you'd have taken something that is sacred and brought it into the realm of the unfit. You would have taken something that is fit and sacred and rendered it unfit, and that's not permitted. That's what we were discussing yesterday. And they looked at a bunch of different examples where teruma, that has no deadline for being eaten by a priest, if you had done various kinds of redemption and exchange and brought it into the realm of Shemitah year produce, sabbatical year produce, which has an expiration date, you would create the same problem for that teruma. The difference here with the guilt offering and the peace offering is that once they are intermingled, there's no other solution available. And if you can't do this, you're going to end up having to burn both. So Rabbi Shimon would say, okay, before the fact, we would not allow this to happen. We don't want to cut short the sanctity of an offering. But now that we're in this situation, this is the best solution available. That's his argument, and they were arguing back and forth on that. So we continue that conversation. So the Gemara asks a question with regard to this resolution suggested by Rabbi Shimon of bringing the offerings. Now we're talking, about a different situation also that has this similar issue where you have a metzora, a possible metzora. Right, somebody that when tsaras existed and you could have this skin condition that was a physical expression of a spiritual malady, and they thought it might be tsaras. A priest has maybe said that you'll be quarantined. I'll come back in a week and tell you whether it's confirmed tsaras or not. Priest doesn't come back for whatever reason. The person with the condition maybe he's not going to have a chance if he doesn't bring offerings now. So he's got a situation where he's saying, if I am a confirmed metzora, then part of my purification procedure at the end of it is to bring a guilt offering. This is a guilt offering that's part of the purification of a metzora. But if I'm not a metzora, then I'm going to bring the same animal as a peace offering. So again, we're getting there by a different route. But again, we're going to treat one offering as, in this case, with a stipulation. I'm going to bring a guilt offering, but if I'm not obligated to bring a guilt offering, then I'm going to bring it as a peace offering. The problem here is that a guilt offering also has accessories with it, right? Ancillary elements of an offering that the peace offering wouldn't have. And how are we going to deal with those? Right, so with regard to the resolution suggested by Rabbi Shimon for bringing the offerings of the metzora and stating a stipulation. Says the Gemara, this works out well with regard to the guilt offering, but with regard to the log of oil, what can be said? A log is a volume of oil. A log of oil does not accompany a peace offering. So the Gemara explains that the individual bringing the offering says, if I am not a metzora, then this log of oil shall be a gift to the temple, as one can dedicate oil to the temple. But the Gemara questions this resolution. But perhaps he is not a metzora. And if so, it is required that a priest remove a handful of the donated oil and sacrifice a handful of it on the altar before the rest of the oil may be consumed by the priests as a gift to the priests in the temple, as is the law with regard to oil brought as an offering. And the Gemara explains that this is referring to a case where the priest has already removed that handful. So the Gemara further challenges and says, but perhaps he is in fact a metzora, and he requires the placement of the 7 sprinklings of oil before the Lord of a metzora undergoing his final purification. We learn those in Leviticus 14, verses 15 and 16. So the Gemara answers that the priest does place those sprinklings. Well, which is it? You're trying to fulfill the requirements of 2 paths, right? The guilt offering that has a log of oil accompanying with it and certain placements of the oil on the metzora as part of his purification. But if he's bringing a peace offering, okay, there is no accompanying oil, so he's going to bring a further gift to the temple in the form of that oil. Can we really have it both ways? So the Gemara challenges again, how can the priest sprinkle the oil as he would for a metzora if the person might not be a metzora? But it is lacking, as a handful has been removed from the oil, since we're treating it as a possible gift, and one sprinkles only from the whole log of oil, and now some has been removed. So the Gemara explains that in order to fulfill, again, both requirements, the Gemara explains that after the handful is removed, the priest brings a little more oil to the container and fills it up so that it's a complete log of oil. And this is what we learned in a Mishna and Negayim 14:10. In a case where the log of oil lacked a full measure, then if it became lacking before the priest poured from it into his palm in order to place it on the right thumb and big toe of the metzora, the priest shall top off the log of oil. Make sure there's a complete log there. They'll just add some more oil to it. But the Gemara challenges again. Okay, but if he is not a metzora, and that log of oil is a gift to the temple and the priests, so that handful that was removed from the oil requires burning on the altar for the remainder of the oil to be permitted to the priests. And the Gemara explains that the priest does in fact burn that handful. And so the Gemara asks, well, when does the priest burn the handful? If he does so after the placement of the 7 sprinklings for the metzora's purification, in such a case, the log will be lacking due to the sprinklings. And that which remains is akin to the remainder of a meal offering that was lacking between the removal of the handful and the burning, and one may not burn the handful for that remainder. So similar to a gift of oil, in a meal offering, a handful is removed from the offering and then sacrificed on the altar. And if, after the handful is removed, but before it is sacrificed, some of the remainder of the meal offering is separated, the handful may not be sacrificed. And the same should apply if some of the oil was sprinkled after the handful was removed. In other words, you're having technical, and technical is not a good word here, you're having difficulties if you're trying to flow along 2 paths simultaneously, the path of a purification guilt offering from metzora and the path for a gift peace offering to satisfy both with the same objects, you're going to run into contradictions. And if, alternatively, the priest burns a handful before the placement of the 7 sprinklings, once he has burned the handful, he may no longer perform the sprinklings, in accordance with the principle that whatever is partly burned in the fire on the altar is subject to the prohibition of you may not make as an offering in Leviticus 2:11. This principle states that if part of an item, such as the blood of an animal offering or the handful of a meal offering, has been sacrificed, one who sacrifices any other part of it that is not designated for sacrifice has violated this prohibition. And the sprinkling of the oil is equivalent to sacrifice in this regard. So Rav Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, says that the priest does not sprinkle the oil as a definite rite like ritual, but stipulates that if the man is not a metzora, he is sprinkling it in a manner analogous to the other items that one burns for the sake of wood. This is very interesting. We're going to talk more about this today. Burning for the sake of wood means you're going to bring something that would normally not be permitted to be offered as an offering on the altar to the Lord, and you're going to burn it on the altar anyway. And how is that possible? Because you're not burning it as an offering. You're burning something that is flammable and using it as further fuel for the fire, right? So in other words, leaven, right? Leaven, like leavened bread, the yeast that makes bread rise, and honey, by which they usually mean date honey. These are things that are not permitted to accompany offerings on the altar, right? Neither with the incense, and we learn every day that when they would compound the incense, if they had added some honey, some date honey to it, its scent would have been absolutely irresistible. But why did they not add honey to it? Because it's prohibited to bring honey as an offering before the Lord. It's just something that the Torah states explicitly. So you would think that therefore honey could never be placed on the altar. But they're going to come to the opposite conclusion. You can put honey up on the altar in certain situations, but it has to be with the understanding that you're just using it as fuel for the fire, not as some kind of an offering in itself, but rather as just something that is flammable that is going to assist in burning whatever needs to be burned on the altar, i.e. the offerings. And that is what's called burning for the sake of wood. As it is taught in a baraisa, the R Eliezer says, the verse states, no meal offering that you shall bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven, for you shall make no leaven nor any honey, smoke from it as an offering by fire to the Lord. As an offering of first fruits, you may bring them to the Lord, but they shall not come up for a pleasing aroma on the altar. Leviticus 2, verses 11 and 12. And recall that Rashi tells us that when the Torah says in a bunch of places that something shall be brought as a pleasing aroma before the Lord, what that means to God is, I commanded you and you did it. Right? I made a commandment to the Jews and they did it. That's what is pleasing about the aroma of sacrifices being offered on the altar to the Lord. It's not so much that God enjoys the smell of a barbecue. It's that he issued a commandment and his people fulfilled it. Right? So that means pleasing aroma means get it right. Right? Fulfill the law as intended. So this verse indicates that you may not offer up any leaven or honey as a pleasing aroma, meaning as an offering. But you may offer up leaven and honey and other substances for the sake of wood, not as an offering. So here as well, the priest stipulates that if the man is not a confirmed metzora, the sprinkling of oil should not be viewed as a rite, but rather the equivalent of bringing leaven or honey on the altar just as firewood. Now we're on 77a. So the Gemara questions further, but even if the priest removes a handful from the oil and burns it, and also sprinkles from the oil, there is the matter of the remainder of the oil, which must be filled after the removal of the handful, so that the priest can perform the sprinkling with the full log. And there is therefore that bit of oil that was added from which the priest did not remove the handful initially. Again, since you're trying to flow down two channels simultaneously, there's going to be contradictions because they have different rules and you can't fulfill both at the same time. So if the one bringing the offering is not a metzora, the log of oil is a gift, and it will turn out that there is a small portion of the oil that was not permitted by removal of the handful because some was added after the handful. And the Gemara explains that the priest redeems it, i.e. after the sprinklings of the oil have been performed, he stipulates that if the person who brought the offering is not a metzora, then the oil should be desacralized by giving its value to the temple treasury. It's going to be a world of complications in order to fulfill both channels at the same time, but the Gemara says, okay, but there's a way to do it. Now, the Gemara asks, if you say that he redeems it, where does he redeem it? If he redeems it when the oil is within the walls of the temple, he would thereby be bringing non-sacred oil into the courtyard, something that's not permitted. And if he redeems the oil outside the courtyard before he can redeem the oil, it would become disqualified due to the prohibition of a consecrated item leaving the courtyard. Right? Because one is a consecrated item, the oil used for... I'm not even sure which is which. I'm assuming, the oil that would be brought as an offering is consecrated with the sanctity of an offering. Oil that's being used to sprinkle on a metzora, that's not an offering in itself. It's just part of his procedure. So that doesn't have the sanctity of an offering. So how can you flow along both channels at the same time? So actually, says the Gemara, he redeems the oil when it is within the walls of the temple, and it is permitted because the non-sacred oil is then found in the temple courtyard by itself, i.e. he did not bring a non-sacred item into the temple courtyard. It's like it became a non-sacred item, I guess, once it was there. Now, the Gemara asks a question with regard to the suggested resolution, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, that one whose status as a metzora, one who has the status of an uncertain metzora, should bring a log of oil as a gift offering and state the stipulation. Right? Again, if he is a metzora, that log of oil is used to purify him. If he's not a metzora, then it's an additional offering next to the animal that he's bringing as a peace offering rather than a guilt offering. That's his stipulation. So now the Gemara says, but doesn't Rabbi Shimon say that one may not donate oil as a gift? Like, this whole thing is depending on the idea that the oil, if he's bringing it as a guilt offering for his purification as a metzora, okay, the oil is there and it's being used properly. But if he's not a metzora and therefore his animal is being brought as a peace offering, then what's the oil doing there? Okay, well, he's donating the oil as a separate offering, an additional offering that he's bringing that day. Okay, but does everyone agree that oil is something that can be brought as a voluntary offering? Not only do some not agree with that, but Rabbi Shimon himself seems like he doesn't. But doesn't Rabbi Shimon say that one may not donate oil as a gift? And the Gemara answers, as on page 76b a moment ago, the remedy of a person is different, i.e. Rabbi Shimon concedes that one may donate oil in this instance. Why? Because this is the only manner by which this person can undergo ritual purification because of his uncertain status as a metzora. The Gemara continues to discuss the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. It was stated above that according to Rabbi Shimon, one whose status as a metzora that is uncertain may bring a lamb as a gift for a peace offering and state a stipulation with regard to it. And the Gemara relates that Rav Rehumi was sitting before Ravina, and he was sitting and saying the following in the name of Rav Huna bar Tachlifa. But why can't he bring a lamb for a guilt offering and say that if he is not a metzora, then this guilt offering shall be a provisional guilt offering? That's different than the guilt offering of a metzora. A provisional guilt offering is one that you would bring where if you know you committed that you violated a prohibition, that if you did intentionally would get you charis, and if you did it unwittingly, you become obligated to bring a sin offering. Again, this is only when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. Unwittingly, you would have to bring a sin offering. But the problem here is you're not sure whether you committed it or not. If you did commit it, it was unwitting, but it's a situation where you're not sure if you did it or not, right? You ate a piece of meat that you thought was kosher. It turned out that there were two pieces of meat in front of you. One of them was not kosher. The other one was kosher. So you're not sure whether you ate the kosher meat, in which case you haven't done anything wrong, or you ate the unkosher meat unwittingly, in which case, if you knew you ate it, you would have to bring a sin offering. But since you're not sure if you ate it or not, that's where you bring the asham talui, the provisional guilt offering. So here they're suggesting, okay, instead of I'm bringing either the sin offering of a metzora or a voluntary peace offering, why not say I'm either bringing the guilt offering of a metzora or a provisional guilt offering. This guilt offering is eaten for 1 day and a night, like the guilt offering of a metzora, and therefore he would not be reducing the time for its consumption, unlike when he stipulates that it should be a peace offering. So you wouldn't have the problem of introducing a deadline that would shorten its period of sanctity, which is what we've been dealing with since we started this Mishnah. So Rav Rehumi continued, since this option was not suggested, one can learn from it one can learn from here that who is the Tana who disagrees with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that one may donate a provisional guilt offering? It is Rabbi Shimon, who says that by inference from his suggestion here, that one may not donate a provisional guilt offering, right? Because a provisional guilt offering is not a free will voluntary offering. It's something that you bring when you have a very specific situation. Maybe you owe a sin offering, or maybe you don't. And you cannot know what the answer is, so it's a case of uncertain possible sin offering, but you can never know whether you really did it, whether you really owe the sin offering or not. So then you have to bring the provisional guilt offering. But you can't voluntarily bring a provisional guilt offering because you feel like it. It's only used for that specific situation, according to Rabbi Shimon, right? Who says by inference from his suggestion here that one may not donate voluntarily a provisional guilt offering. And Ravina said to Rav Rehumi, Torah. What does he mean by that? Meaning, where is the Torah of such a great man as yourself? You are confusing lambs with rams. The guilt offering of a metzora is a lamb in its first year, which cannot be brought as a provisional guilt offering because these must be rams, i.e. they must be in their second year. Even if you thought that it's possible to voluntarily bring a provisional guilt offering, the provisional guilt offering uses a different animal because it's older than the guilt offering of a metzora. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 8. And we move on to Mishnah 3. In the case of the limbs of a sin offering, which are eaten by priests and may not be burned on the altar, but they became intermingled with the limbs of a burnt offering, which are burned on the altar. So what do we do in this situation? Rabbi Eliezer says, the priest shall place all the limbs above on the altar, and I view the flesh of the limbs of the sin offering above on the altar as though they were pieces of wood being burned on the altar, and not as though they are an offering, right? So there are pieces of a sin offering that are burned on the altar. We're not talking about those. We're talking about the pieces of a sin offering that are eaten by the priest. And those limbs of the sin offering became intermingled with equivalent limbs of a burnt offering. But the limbs of a burnt offering do go up on the altar. So similar issue to what we had in the last Mishnah. So what is the solution to this? Rabbi Shimon says, just put them all up on the altar, right? The priests don't have to eat them. But how can you say that? They're supposed to be eaten by the priest. If you now burn them on the altar, then you remove them from the sanctity that they would have for a longer amount of time, and the opportunity to be consumed by the priest, which is what's supposed to happen with those portions of an offering when it's a sin offering. He says, okay, we're not going to actually burn them on the altar as a burnt offering, but since they might be the burnt offering, they're going up on the altar. So if they're supposed to be the burnt offering, then they're being consumed as a burnt offering. But if they're actually the parts of the sin offering that should have been eaten by the priest, then I'm not going to consider them as being brought up on the altar as a burnt offering. I'm going to consider them as wood, right? They're just being used as fuel, a little bit like we were talking about before, that leaven and honey, which can't be brought on the altar as offerings, could be burned on the altar just because they work as fuel. That's Rabbi Eliezer's solution to when limbs of a sin offering get intermingled with limbs of a burnt offering. But the rabbis say, meaning the majority who overrule Rabbi Eliezer, one should wait until the form of all the intermingled limbs decays, and then they will go out to the place of burning in the temple courtyard, where all disqualified offerings of the most sacred order are burned. Right? And recall, anything that doesn't go up in time, it doesn't get eaten by the priest as a sin offering, or doesn't get up onto the altar as a burnt offering within the deadline, right, by that night, after it was brought during the day, then they can no longer be consumed, not by the priest and not by the altar. If they just got into that situation accidentally, let's say, then it's nasar, left over and disqualified. Or if the priest had intended that from the beginning for some reason, it would be pigul. And in both cases, now they can't go up on the altar, be eaten by the priest, and they just go out to the place of burning. So the majority are saying to Eliezer, they need to be burned. End of story. This intermingling can't be solved by treating them like burnt offerings and stipulating that the parts that are limbs of a sin offering are just going to be treated as wood. That nice try, Rabbi Eliezer, doesn't work, right? And I just told this joke this morning, and I haven't posted it yet, so I'll share it with you, my friends. Our Talmudic group here will definitely appreciate. And if you remember when we discussed Rabbi Eliezer, this is the same Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, and his great argument, famous argument in Bava Metzia 59b about the oven of Achnai, where it was Eliezer versus all the sages, and some miracles were performed to prove that Rabbi Eliezer was right? So that's where you find that story. The joke version of that story is like this. There was a matter of Torah law in which Rabbi Eliezer was in a heated dispute with three other sages. And he knew that he was right, but they outvoted him, and the law was going to go the other way for all time. And in his frustration, Rabbi Eliezer shouted out, if the law is according to me, let the water in this river flow backward. And the river flowed backward. And the other sages said, yeah, we don't listen to rivers. So Rabbi Eliezer said, if the law is according to what I'm saying, let that forest to the east of this mountain pick up and move to the west of the mountain. And the forest got up and moved to the other side of the mountain. And Rabbi Eliezer says, And the other rabbis said, we don't listen to forests. Rabbi Eliezer can't believe it. And he said, if the law is according to what I'm saying, let heaven declare that the law is according to me. And the bas kol, right? The voice of heaven spoke up and said, the law is according to Rabbi Eliezer. In fact, in the Gemara, Bava Metzora 59b, the voice from heaven goes even further and says, why are you arguing with Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer is always right. The law is according to Rabbi Eliezer. And the other rabbis said, no. So now it's 3-2. And the law went according to the majority. Now, the outcome from that story is emotional, tragic. I mean, has such far-reaching consequences to this day. If you want to review that story again, Bava Metzora 59b. But Rabbi Eliezer tends to be right. But there are times when the majority overrules him, and this is one of them. And we follow the majority because, right, in matters of law that are going to be ordained and dictated by a ruling from the sages, from our rabbis, the law is, the Torah says that the elders will decide in a particular generation when such a question comes up. And how do they decide? By the majority, right? It's a vote. It's a vote of those who are qualified to vote. And Rabbi Eliezer lost that vote and this vote. Okay, that's Mishnah 3. And now we go to the Gemara. What is the reason of Rabbi Eliezer for deeming it permitted to burn the limbs of the sin offering on the altar as wood? And by the way, if you like that joke, Hanukkah's coming up. You guys know that this makes a great Hanukkah gift. And that story of Rabbi Eliezer and the other sages is in the book, Let My People Laugh. It's on Amazon. It's a bestseller. You'll love it. Makes a gift for all your gift-giving needs. Okay, so what is the reason of Rabbi Eliezer for deeming it permitted to burn the limbs of the sin offering on the altar as wood? And the Gemara explains. The verse states, no meal offering that you shall bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven, for you shall make no leaven, nor any honey, smoke as an offering made by fire to the Lord. As an offering of first fruits you may bring them to the Lord, but they shall not come up for a pleasing aroma on the altar. Again, Leviticus 2, verses 11 and 12. And this indicates that you may not offer up leaven and honey as a pleasing aroma, i.e. as an offering, but you may offer up leaven and honey and other substances that are prohibited to be sacrificed on the altar, such as the limbs of a sin offering, for the sake of wood. Not as an offering, but just as fuel on the fire on the altar. And the Gemara asks, okay, well, that sounds pretty good, Rabbi Eliezer. Why do the rabbis disagree with him? And the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Eliezer, how do they respond to his reasoning? They claim that the merciful one excludes other cases at the beginning of the verse. As an offering of first fruits you may bring them. This indicates that it is regard to them, leaven and honey alone, that it is stated you may not offer up as an offering, but you may offer up leaven and honey for the sake of wood. But with regard to other substances that are prohibited to be brought on the altar, including the limbs of sin offerings, one may not offer them up on the altar at all. Not as an offering, obviously, nor as firewood. The Gemara asks, in Rabbi Eliezer, what does he derive from this term of exclusion, them? And the Gemara explains, Rabbi Eliezer expounds the word as follows. It is only with regard to them, leaven and honey, that the verse includes a prohibition against bringing them up to the ramp of the altar, like offering them up on the altar itself. But with regard to other substances that are prohibited to be sacrificed upon the altar, bringing them up on the ramp is not considered like offering them up on the altar itself. So the Gemara says, okay, and what do the rabbis, from where do they learn this particular law about the ramp? And the Gemara answers that the rabbis learn two laws from the term them. This term of emphasis teaches that all that is stated in this verse is referring only to leaven and honey. Both the law that it is permitted to offer them up on the altar as wood, and the ruling that the ramp is considered like the altar with regard to this law. New topic. The Gemara comments, the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of the following Tana, as it is taught in a Baraisa, that Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis did not disagree with regard to the limbs of a sin offering that were intermingled with the limbs of a burnt offering, as all agree that they shall be sacrificed. So Rabbi Yehuda is totally changing the meaning of what we learned in the Mishnah, right? Rabbi Yehuda is saying, no. The rabbis agree with Rabbi Eliezer that if the limbs of a sin offering, the limbs of a burnt offering became intermingled, you can put them all up on the altar. But, says Rabbi Yehuda, the disagreement between Eliezer and the rabbis was in something a little subtler. Likewise, they agree that if limbs that are fit to be burned on the altar became intermingled with the limbs of an animal that copulated with a person, right, was subject of bestiality, whether it was performing the bestiality or receiving the bestiality, which are prohibited to be sacrificed on the altar, then they shall not be sacrificed, even according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, right? Then even that case, if the limbs of an offering were intermingled with something that is absolutely prohibited to put on the altar, like the limbs of an animal that was used in bestiality, then you can't put this mixture on the altar. It has to go out to the place where things are burned, that were disqualified. There's nothing else to do with them. Not the altar, but outside the courtyard for that kind of burning. So they agree that in the case of our Mishnah, they do go up on the altar like Rabbi Eliezer, and Eliezer concedes that where there's something with an absolute prohibition, the intermingled mix all goes out to the place of burning outside the temple. So Eliezer and the rabbis would agree in both cases according to Rabbi Yehuda. So what is it that Eliezer and the rabbis disagree on? So with regard to which case did Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis disagree? They disagreed with regard to the limbs of an unblemished burnt offering that were intermingled with the limbs of a blemished animal which is disqualified from the altar. As in this case, Rabbi Eliezer says all the limbs shall be sacrificed, and I consider the flesh of the limbs of the sin offering above on the altar as though they are pieces of wood burned on the altar. And the rabbis say they shall not be sacrificed. It shall all go out to the place of burning. The Gemara asks, and that is the law. And the Gemara asks, in the case of blemished offerings. It's also the law, how it's stated in the Mishnah. Now the Gemara asks, and concerning the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, what is different about the limbs of an animal that actively copulated with a person, or the limbs of an animal that was the object of bestiality, that they may not be sacrificed even as firewood? If one says that the reason is that they are not fit for the altar, that's not the reason, as a blemished animal is not fit for the altar as well. And here he holds that those limbs would be burned as firewood. Now we're on 77b. So Rav Huna says, when Rabbi Eliezer makes reference to a blemished animal, he is speaking of an unobtrusive blemish. For example, one that is on the cornea of the eye of the animal. And his ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says that in the case of an offering with such a blemish, if its sacrificial parts ascended the altar, shouldn't have gone up, but once they do go up on the altar, we don't pull it off the altar, because it is not a disgrace to the altar for the sacrificial parts of such an offering to be burned on it, a tiny blemish. So the Gemara raises a difficulty. Well, say that Rabbi Akiva says this is the law after the fact, meaning that if the priest already brought up the limbs of these blemished animals, they do not descend from the altar. But does Rabbi Akiva say that one may burn a mixture of these limbs ab initio? And Rav Papa says, what are we dealing with here? We are dealing with a case where all the limbs in the mixture were brought up upon the ramp. Since they have been brought on the ramp and sacrificed as offerings, it is considered after the fact. Once they start their journey up the ramp, that's considered after the fact, even if they haven't already reached the altar. And the Gemara raises a difficulty, if so, i.e. if we are dealing with a case in which the limbs were already carried to the ramp, then even if they were as is and not intermingled, the limbs of the blemished animal should be burned, as claimed, according to this, the view of Rabbi Akiva. So rather, the reason of Rabbi Eliezer is that with regard to the prohibition against sacrificing a blemished animal on the altar, the merciful one excludes certain cases. After listing the various disqualifying blemishes in the Torah, the verse states, "Neither from the hand of a foreigner shall you offer the bread of your God of any of these, because their corruption is in them, there is a blemish in them, they shall not be accepted for you." And this teaches that it is only if there is a blemish clearly in them that they shall not be accepted. But if they were sacrificed by means of a mixture, they shall be accepted. And this exclusion is stated only with regard to blemished animals, not with regard to animals that have some other kind of severe disqualification, like animals used in bestiality, which even if they were intermingled with fit animals, the whole mixture cannot go up on the altar because it's a severe disqualification. And the Gemara asks, and the rabbis, how do they expound this verse? And the Gemara explains that they expound it as follows. It is only if the blemish is still in them that they shall not be accepted, but if their blemish has passed, they shall be accepted. And Rabbi Eliezer derives this law from the previous clause in that same verse, because their corruption is in them. Since the verse could have stated the shorter version of bam instead of bahem, one derives from here that if the animal is no longer blemished, it is accepted as an offering. Some blemishes are temporary. And as for the rabbis, they do not interpret anything from the variation between bam and bahem. They do not see this as a significant deviation from the standard language of the verse. The Gemara asks, if that is so, and Rabbi Eliezer permits the limbs of blemished animals to be sacrificed if they are in a mixture, why is it necessary for him to say, I view the flesh of the limbs of the blemished animals as though they are pieces of wood? After all, if you're saying that the solution is just to bring them up as a mixture to be sacrificed, why call it that the limbs of the sin offering are going up there as wood? They're just being sacrificed because this is your solution. After all, the merciful one permits them as an offering. There's nothing inherently wrong. They're not disqualified from the altar. So the Gemara explains that Rabbi Eliezer is speaking to the rabbis in accordance with their statement as follows. According to my opinion, the merciful one permits these limbs to be sacrificed on the altar. But even according to your opinion, at least agree with me that the flesh of a blemished animal that was intermingled with the flesh of qualified offerings is considered like wood, just as is the law of the flesh of a sin offering that became intermingled with the flesh of a burnt offering. As according to this baraisa, the rabbis concede that the flesh of these two offerings can be brought on the altar together. And the Gemara asks, and the rabbis, how do they respond to this claim of Rabbi Eliezer? And the Gemara explains that according to the rabbis, there is a difference between the cases. Here, with regard to a mixture that includes limbs of blemished animals, these limbs are repulsive, and therefore they may not be brought upon the altar, even as wood. Conversely, there, in the case of the mixture of limbs of a sin offering with a burnt offering, the limbs of the sin offering are not repulsive in and of themselves, and consequently they may be sacrificed upon the altar as wood. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah 3. Now we're going to do Mishnah 4 and its Gemara, and both the Mishnah and the Gemara together are very short. So we're almost done for today. So questions or comments, please get them in now. Okay, Mishnah 4, in a case where limbs of burnt offerings, which are fit for sacrifice, were intermingled with limbs of blemished burnt offerings, this is the case we were just discussing, Rabbi Eliezer says, although all the limbs are unfit for sacrifice, if the head of one of them was sacrificed, all the heads shall be sacrificed, as the head that was sacrificed is assumed to have been that of the unfit animal in the mixture. And now the rest is fit, and you can therefore continue to its path to the altar. Likewise, if one sacrificed the legs of one of them, all the legs shall be sacrificed. And the rabbis say, overruling Rabbi Eliezer, even if all the limbs were sacrificed except for one of them, there is a concern that the remaining limb is the unfit limb, which may not be sacrificed. So rather, all the limbs must go out to the place of burning in the temple courtyard. You're not going to take the risk of putting something on the altar intentionally that may be unfit for the altar. Better you should take the whole mixture and put it in the place of burning, not the altar. That's Mishnah 4, and now the short, very short Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Eliezer permitted the sacrificing of all the heads only if they were sacrificed 2 by 2, as at least one of each pair is certainly permitted. But he did not permit them to be sacrificed 1 by 1 in case the priest may be sacrificing the prohibited head by itself. If you go 2 by 2, all right, there's only one unfit limb or head of an offering in this mixture. So when you're putting up 2 at a time, it's like each 2 that go up on the altar. Worst case, one of this pair is fit, the other is unfit. So it's like a mixture, and the other pairs are going to be fully fit. But you can't go just one item at a time, because then you might be putting one unfit limb or one unfit head of an animal on the altar. Rabbi Yirmiyah raises an objection from the Mishnah, which states, and the rabbis say, even if all the limbs were sacrificed except for one of them, all the limbs must go out to the place of burning in the temple courtyard. This indicates that even in this situation, where only one of the limbs remains, the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbi still applies, which means that Rabbi Eliezer permits it to be sacrificed despite the fact that it is only one limb. And Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Tachlifa said to Rabbi Yirmiyah in response, I will explain the meaning of this statement to you. What does the Mishnah mean when it states except for one of them? It means except for one pair, i.e. 2 limbs, as even Rabbi Eliezer did not permit one to sacrifice the limbs individually. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah 4. Tomorrow, when Shabbos ends and I can get back online, it's getting to be the earliest Shabbos of the year. But so something like, I think Shabbos is going to be ending around 5:30. Hopefully I can get on the air 6:15, 6:30 Pacific tomorrow night. We'll pick it up with Mishnah 4. Looking at a couple of questions and comments. Sharon, what I am taking away as a generality is that if you do the more stringent of 2 possible sacrificial offerings, that is the only way you can meet the requirements of both. That's definitely Rabbi Shimon's position, and in a sense Rabbi Eliezer's too. However, we have a problem where if you do the most stringent way to handle both, you're going to create a problem that wouldn't have existed, where you're limiting something holy that would not have been limited. And then the question is, well, are we going to accept that in order to do the only other thing that we can in terms of getting it to the altar? Or are we going to go with the view of the rabbis, which is like, yeah, but we it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You can try to meet the requirements of both by doing the more stringent path. But since it doesn't really meet the requirements of both, better that neither should go up on the altar, and we'll just dispose of it in the proper way of disposal of something that is unfit, that was sacred once, and that is the place of burning in the temple courtyard, that is not the altar. And that's it for questions and comments. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, see you tomorrow after Shabbos ends. Have a great night and good Shabbos.